Dr. Alan Mercer had never been a man who tolerated weakness. For 30 years, he had worn his white coat like a shield, striding into emergency rooms and trauma bays with the certainty of a general commanding a battlefield. Younger doctors admired him, feared him, tried to emulate him, and always fell short. Nurses grumbled about his temper, but they followed his orders without hesitation because he was rarely wrong. To Mercer, medicine wasn't about bedside manner or collaboration. It was about winning. Winning against blood loss, against stroke, against the unrelenting march of death. But tonight, in the harsh fluorescent light of St. Mark's emergency department, Mercer was losing. It had been a brutal evening from the start. By 8 p.m., the waiting room was standing room only. Flu season had packed the triage bays with coughing children and weary parents. A pileup on the interstate sent 2 carloads of trauma victims rolling through the doors, bleeding on gurneys. There were overdoses, chest pains, a diabetic and ketoacidosis. The noise of it was constant. Monitors chiming, overhead announcements blaring, voices overlapping in frantic urgency. It was the kind of night Mercer used to thrive on, the kind that sharpened him, made him indispensable. But instead of sharpening, it was grinding him down. At first, it was small things. He forgot a patient's name mid-sentence, covering it with a gruff "you." He ordered an ultrasound when the CT had already been done. His hands trembled slightly as he sutured a forehead laceration, the needle slipping wide enough that the nurse had to hand him another kit. Most staff brushed it off. Everyone had off nights. But Nurse Danielle Cruz didn't brush it off. She had worked with Mercer for nearly a decade. She knew his rhythms, the rise and fall of his temper, the way he liked his patients prepped before he stormed into the room. She had seen him exhausted, irritable, even reckless. But she had never seen him uncertain. Tonight, uncertainty clung to him like a second skin. And when he nearly pushed 10 times the normal dose of amiodarone into a patient's 4, she could no longer excuse it. She caught his hand before the plunger depressed. "That's the wrong dose, doctor," she said firmly. His eyes flicked down at the syringe, then back at her, narrowing. "I know what I'm doing. You almost gave 10 times the amount." She didn't raise her voice, but she didn't waver either. "I fixed it." For a moment, she thought he might explode. His face flushed, his mouth opened, and then he snapped it shut again. He set the syringe down harder than necessary and stalked out of the room, muttering something about ungrateful nurses. Danielle finished stabilizing the patient with the resident, her pulse hammering. It wasn't the first mistake she'd caught that night. It was just the most dangerous. By midnight, the ER staff had all noticed something was wrong. Dr. Zhao, a second-year resident, whispered to another about how Mercer misread an EKG as supraventricular tachycardia when it was clearly atrial fibrillation. A tech shook his head after watching Mercer drop a syringe, pick it up, and try to use it until a nurse stopped him. No one said anything aloud. Mercer's reputation made speaking up risky, but the fear was there, silent and palpable. Then the trauma bay doors burst open. Paramedics rushed in, a man in his 50s, pulseless and in full cardiac arrest. The team surged forward. Mercer shoved to the head of the bed. "Tube him," he barked. His voice was commanding, but Danielle noticed the hesitation in his eyes as he reached for the laryngoscope. His hand shook. The blade slipped once, twice, and the man's oxygen saturation plummeted. "Doctor," Danielle said sharply, stepping forward, "let me do it." "I've got it," he growled. "No, you don't," she shot back, her voice cutting through the chaos. Without waiting for permission, she took the scope from his hand and slid the tube home in one smooth motion. The monitors steadied. The resident squeezed the amber bag, oxygen flowing. The room exhaled. Mercer stood frozen, the instrument dangling uselessly in his hand. Everyone had seen it. Everyone knew. For the first time in his career, he had failed in the most public way possible. The code ended successfully, but the silence that followed was heavy. Mercer muttered something about fatigue, about too many hours, but the words sounded thin, excuses no one believed. Danielle exchanged a look with the charge nurse. Enough was enough. She called the on-call administrator, Mr. Harris, and explained in clipped tones what had happened: the miscalculated dosage, the misread EKG, the failed intubation. "He's a danger to patients," she said. "We can't keep covering for him. Someone has to step in." Harris came down himself. He watched for 30 minutes, saw Mercer shuffle through charts like he couldn't remember what he was looking for, saw him snap at a resident for asking a perfectly normal question, saw his head droop for a fraction of a second at the nurse's station. That was all it took. "Alan," Harris said finally, approaching him at the station, "I think it's time you went home." Mercer blinked at him as though he'd misheard. "Home? You've lost your mind. We're drowning tonight. You think Zhao can run a trauma without me? You think Cruz can handle an airway on her own?" "They already did," Harris replied evenly. "And they'll continue. You're not fit to be here." Mercer's face darkened. "Not fit? Do you know how many lives I've saved? How many times this hospital has leaned on me while everyone else flailed? I built this ER. And you're telling me to go home like some intern who can't hack it?" His voice rose, sharp and ragged, echoing down the hall. Staff froze, eyes darting between them. "Alan," Harris said quietly but firmly, "this isn't optional. Go home. Now." Something inside Mercer cracked. He slammed his pen down on the counter, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "You can't do this. You can't just cast me aside like I'm nothing." His voice broke, desperate now. He looked around at the faces, nurses, residents, techs. None of them looked at him with respect anymore. Their eyes held pity, fear, relief. Danielle stepped forward. "Please, Alan. Don't make this worse. Just go home." He stared at her, betrayal etched deep into his features. She had been one of his strongest nurses, one of the few he trusted. And now she was the one standing against him. His hands clenched into fists. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. But then, slowly, he shrugged off his white coat, balled it in his fist, and hurled it onto the counter. "Fine," he spat. "Let's see how you survive without me." He stalked to the doors. They hissed open, and then he was gone. The ER stood in stunned silence. No one spoke. Danielle picked up the coat, smoothed it, and set it aside. Then she said quietly, "Back to work. Patients are waiting." And just like that, the spell was broken. The ER moved again, fluid and steady. Without Mercer's volatility, the team found a rhythm. Residents stepped into leadership roles. Nurses coordinated seamlessly. The atmosphere was focused, not fearful. Danielle felt the difference in her bones. For the first time in years, the ER wasn't orbiting around Dr. Mercer's gravity. But relief didn't erase the weight of what had happened. The decision to remove him would echo far beyond this night. Mercer wasn't just another doctor. He was a legend. And legends didn't fall quietly. Outside, Mercer sat in his car in the dark parking lot, his hands gripping the wheel until his knuckles whitened. He hadn't gone home. He couldn't. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, something he hadn't done in months. The smoke filled his lungs, harsh and bitter. He replayed the night over and over, the syringe, the EKG, the failed intubation. Danielle's eyes when she told him to step back. Harris's calm finality. The looks on the residents' faces. For the first time, he wondered if he had become the very thing he despised, a liability. He had always defined himself by his competence, his unshakable control. Without that, what was left? Inside, Danielle filed her report. She wrote it clinically, without exaggeration. She described the mistakes, the confrontation, the removal. Her hand didn't shake, but her chest felt heavy. She knew Mercer would see it as betrayal. She knew some would whisper that she had taken down a giant. But she also knew patients had lived tonight who might not have if Mercer had stayed. And that truth steadied her. In the weeks that followed, Mercer was placed on leave pending evaluation. Rumors spread through the hospital like wildfire. Some staff defended him. He saved more lives than anyone here, while others shook their heads, saying it had been coming for years. Danielle tried to stay out of the debates. She focused on her patients, her team, the work that never stopped. When Mercer returned, months later, he was different. The fire in his eyes had dimmed. His hands no longer trembled, but his authority had evaporated. He no longer barked orders, he asked. He no longer terrified residents. He seemed almost grateful for their help. Some said he was humbled. Others said he was broken. But everyone remembered that night. The night when a nurse had to stand against a doctor, when a legend had been forced to step down, when the ER learned it could breathe without him. For Danielle, the memory stayed sharp. She thought often about the look on Mercer's face as he walked out, about the silence that followed, about the moment she realized that protecting patients sometimes meant challenging even the untouchable. It wasn't triumph she felt when she remembered, it was the weight of responsibility. A weight she carried still, in every shift, in every choice, in every quiet moment where lives balanced on the edge and someone had to decide what came next.